Good morning. You're welcome to the IT Force webinar on ransomware. My name is John Bergen, and I'm just going to do a little brief introduction and take you through an outline agenda. First off, we expect this webinar to run for roughly 30 minutes, depending on Q&A at the end. Just a little bit of housekeeping. Everybody's on auto mute, but we'd welcome questions to come through from anybody who has them. If you look up on the top right of your screen, there's a question and answer box, and that's there for that purpose. So just from previous experience, as questions come to your mind, put them in there, and we'll answer them at the end. So, as I say, the webinar, are you vulnerable to ransomware or malware? And maybe more important, how can you protect yourself in the event that you're confronted with an email that purports to come from a managing director or something like that to say that you transfer money or whatever. So we like to think of ourselves at IT Force as a forward-thinking and proactive company. And recently, in talking to clients, obviously, you know, ransomware and cyber threats, etc., are very to the forefront of everybody's mind. And people are anxious to have users educated on what threats there are and how they can present themselves. This has also been asked of some of our clients, but mainly the financial services clients, by regulatory bodies. So, for example, the central bank are very interested to have financial organizations have their users educated in what they could be confronted with. So, basically, IT Force, we're an award-winning IT managed services company. We've been around since 1999. We're a Deloitte Best Managed company for the last 3 years, and we're an ISO 27001 certified organization. This means we're certified for information security. So, in terms of the agenda, I've just covered off what the client challenges are, and so in particular, clients are worried and anxious about what they're reading in the news. Mark Skelton, who's going to come on in a few minutes here, is going to talk to you then about the traditional support or approach to cybersecurity, how that's been framed, how that then stacks up in terms of modern day threats. He's also going to cover then just some of the recent ransomware attacks. I know they got huge coverage in the press, and people are, as I say, very anxious about that. And then what should you do, not just you do as an organization, but what should you do as a user in certain situations? And then at the very end, we're going to have our Q&A. So that's it from me. I'm going to stay quiet now, and I'm going to hand over to Mark Skelton, and he's going to take you through the rest of this webinar.
Okay, thank you, John. Thanks for that. So my name is Mark Skelton. I'm the Chief Technology Officer for IT Force. I'm the head techie, and I'm going to talk about ransomware. I'll just jump back to the agenda here. John talked a little bit about the client challenges. I'm going to get into then what we call the traditional approach to cybersecurity. I mean, in traditional, we're talking about really up until a year, 2, maybe 3 ago. We'll then talk about modern day threats and maybe a little bit as to why the traditional approach really sometimes isn't enough anymore. We'll focus a little bit on some of the recent ransomware attacks. They're quite topical, obviously, at the moment. Then we'll get to talk again, as John suggested, as to what you, the end user, should do. And we'll talk a bit about the technology, but also the end user responsibilities here. And then hopefully at the end we'll try to get through to some of your questions. So I'll jump straight into it. Traditional cybersecurity overview. Now, as I say, in traditional, we're not going back to the 1950s or anything here. We're talking really up until a year, 2, maybe 3 years ago, kind of 2013, 2014, things started to change. But prior to that, most organizations, even very large organizations, would have had 5 or 6 kind of key pillars in terms of their cybersecurity. You start with a firewall. I mean, everybody knows what a firewall is. You plug one end into the internet and the other end into your network, and it keeps all the bad stuff out. I mean, if you've got a broadband router at home, that's a firewall. You'd have password protection, servers, desktops. Obviously, everybody knows what a password is to log into your PC. You'd have maybe a different password if you log onto servers, firewalls. Probably even your phone, your tablets, etc. You've got passwords to get onto those. Antivirus was and still is a very important part of the picture. You'd have an antivirus agent on your computers, your workstations, your laptops, on your servers, maybe on your firewalls. It's a piece of software which scans, looking for known threats and blocking them. Probably like the cornerstone in some ways of your cybersecurity solution. Web content management was and again still is very important. So web content management, web filtering has a kind of an obvious function in terms of blocking maybe inappropriate access to the internet, stopping people stuff that they shouldn't be doing, or maybe controlling the use, so preventing people spending their whole time on inappropriate or non-business related sites, wasting time. There's a slightly less obvious but incredibly extremely important part of it was basically as part of your cybersecurity. Most threats nowadays have some web element, so that you're trying to get you to click on a link, or a piece of software gets onto your machine which it tries to get out to the web to do something, maybe connect to a command and control center. If you've got a good web filtering in place in front of that, it can actually block and intercept that and effectively neutralize it. So the web content management is extremely important as part of this. Anti-spam email content management, again, another very important element. I say for a long time now, by far the most common method of infection is through email. If you go back maybe 10 years ago, you probably remember getting lots and lots of emails offering you all sorts of wonderful products and services that you probably didn't want, and you probably noticed that that's tailed off a lot in recent years, probably down to a trickle, hopefully. And that's really the anti-spam kicking in, doing that. And email content management adds to that by blocking in the wrong dangerous attachment types, etc., blocking keywords maybe in emails. And that then, along with backups, disaster recovery, which is also a very important part of your cybersecurity. Those were the sort of the kind of 6 main pillars. There are other elements to cybersecurity that I'm not going to dwell on. Your typical small to medium organization probably would have most, if not all, of those in place. Very large corporates would clearly have had all of these, and probably other stuff, patching, management, vulnerability scanning, security policies. There are other elements to cybersecurity that I'm not going to dwell on here, but that was the kind of the typical picture. And if you were a nice, maybe medium-sized, financial organization or something, a couple of years ago, that's what it would have looked like. And I guess it begs the question, where did it all go wrong? And I get onto this next slide to talk about modern day threats. Now, we're really talking about the last couple of years. I suppose kind of in around 2013, when the first of the new generation of ransomware, CryptoLocker came about. Ransomware has been around for quite a long time, since the late 80s, believe it or not, but it really only started to come really to prominence in the last couple of years. So what caused that? There's a lot of reasons. There's far too many to go through in a single slide or maybe even a single presentation, but I just have thrown out a few elements here which I think are important. First of all, the emergence of cloud technologies had a bearing here. Now, please, I'm not for one second suggesting that cloud technologies are a bad idea. I'm a very strongly in favor. Everybody should embrace them, but it does change how you have to protect things. So, for instance, if you were at home on your work laptop accessing cloud email, the firewall that you have in the office is probably of very little use to you, so you have to protect in other ways, is what I'm trying to get across there. A whole new generation of threats started to emerge. Ransomware is probably the highest profile one, simply because of the insidious direct nature of the fact that it just blocks access to your data or your machine. But there's a lot of other, ransomware, in fact, is not the most common. There's lots of other threats out there. Phishing would be another very common one, which basically where they're trying to get you to divulge information, typically financial, maybe your banking online or credit card details, or often logins to systems, maybe your email, etc., so they can launch attacks with that. The whole idea of social engineering, which I believe is a term borrowed from psychology, which is basically using techniques which scammers and con men, etc., would use to try to get you to do stuff. Getting you to, in most cases, they're trying to get you to click on something or to open an attachment, or to do something, do a financial transaction. And I suppose that then begs the question: well, what all of a sudden happened? We had this really good firewalls, best of breed, etc., really well branded stuff, and all of a sudden this new stuff just started getting through, and the largest of the large organisations were being hit by this thing. And really, the next point there is kind of gives an insight into that is very large scale into international criminal gangs started getting involved in this. There is massive amounts of money to be made in cybercrime. I mean, if you look it up, it ends up being sort of a telephone number type. The last one I read is it's projected to reach $2 trillion by 2019. And I read one that a typical cyber criminal can expect to make over $100,000 per month. Again, these are coming from sort of European Interpol. They got those figures from. You can make your own up, but basically there's more money to be made in cybercrime than there is, say, in drugs. These gangs may have been in the past, I don't know, dealing in drugs or selling arms or something like that, but they can make more money out of this, and there's probably, I guess, far less chance of getting shot and killed, which is why they're getting into it. That goes all the way up to state-sponsored. I mean, anybody who's been reading or following up the likes of the American election or other things will hear a lot about this, and sometimes you wonder where the reality ends and the sort of conspiracy theories begin, and it can be difficult. But I suppose the focus here is on criminal gangs. I mean, if a large government somewhere wants to get their hands on your data, you're probably in trouble already. But in most cases, it's criminal gangs. They're after one thing and one thing only. They're after your money, some ways to monetize, to make money out of you, either by directly extortion, making you pay a ransom of some description, by extracting information out of you, like banking details, or basically maybe getting hands on information that you hold that they could use to extort money out of others. They're very, very well resourced. They have a lot of money and a lot of power behind them, and they're a formidable enemy. And this really has been the reason why they've been able to get through and cut through the sort of even the best of breed kind of corporate security systems. Another one that I will mention, which is important, is the introduction of these so-called cryptocurrencies. I must admit, I don't pretend to understand what they are. I know Bitcoin is the best known of them. The key thing with Bitcoin is that it becomes quite easy to extract, often relatively small sums of money, out of people with almost zero chance of being caught. Apparently, it's bordering on impossible to track a Bitcoin transaction. Gone are the days when you had to figure out how to get money out of somebody, throw money off a railway bridge or something, or in the past you might have been able to use the kind of semi-legitimate banking, maybe, I don't know, wire transfer to the Caymans or something like that. But that's all been blocked down. Very, very difficult to use the sort of legitimate standard banking techniques for cybercrime or other types of crime, because it can be blocked. It'll be stopped somewhere. But Bitcoin gets around that, and it also means you don't have to be physically anywhere near. At the bottom of the slide, I'll just talk a little bit about what the effects of these kind of security breaches can be. There can be an obvious monetary one. I mean, if you get hit by, say, ransomware, you might expect, the recent WannaCry, I think, was looking for $300 if it was one Bitcoin, something of that order. So it's not nothing, but it doesn't tend to be a huge amount. They're often after a quick buck here. They want you to quickly pay, just get rid of you. That can vary, though. For larger organizations, that can very quickly get into thousands or even millions that they'll come and look for. But in most cases, it's quite small. The next one is often a bigger problem, and it's the disruption to your business. So if you get hit by ransomware, you could expect several days disruption, quite large-scale loss of productivity, while you have to go in, you have to identify the source, isolate it, fix the problem, make sure that it's fully gone, in which case very often your entire network is down. Then you've got to undo the damage. In most cases, you're restoring data, etc. And it's very, very disruptive for companies. The last one is potentially the most dangerous, and that's reputational damage, which can be done. So if you're hit by one of these, and you're maybe, say, a services company, financial services, something like that, it's obviously not going to instill confidence in your customers if they were there to find out about it, or worse still, were they to leak information of one of your customers, which is another variant of ransomware. So again, some of these are kind of random thoughts almost as to what's caused this. But the key thing here is, in the last couple of years, things have changed. your traditional sort of cybersecurity, firewall and antivirus, etc., on its own is not able to keep up with this. It's not saying that you don't do it. Clearly, you still need all of these and more, but ultimately, there's an element of personal responsibility. We'll talk about that now in a second. So, let's talk a little bit then about some of the recent ransomware attacks. I mean, most people probably know what ransomware is. I won't, you can Google it if you want to get a better definition, a dictionary definition. But basically, it's a piece of malicious software which basically tries to block your access either to your system or your data. The earlier ones, I said, they've been around for a long time. Earlier variants would typically lock out your machine and look for money to unlock your machine, or maybe a single app like hijack your browser and pay us and you can use your browser again. But more recent variants are the so-called crypto ones, which basically use encryption techniques to encrypt your data, maybe not just data on your local machine, but very often on your network up in your file server, and basically then drop ransom notes around the place. And as I said, they've been around for quite a while, but they've started to come more and more common since, I suppose, the last 3 years. There was a very high-profile one, clearly, a couple of weeks ago. Everybody's heard about it at this stage, WannaCry or WannaCrypt. It hit a very large number of companies. Very notably, the UK's NHS were very badly hit, crippled by it for several days. And some other, again, really large companies like FedEx in the US-based, Renault in France, I believe, had to stop manufacturing cars for several days. Telefonica in Spain were very badly hit. I mean, these are large companies, these were hit by that. Netflix was another one in recent weeks, last month I believe. Technically not a ransomware attack, it's what's called leakware, where it's kind of this sort of similar idea. Basically they get their hands on your data and then they threaten to leak it online if you don't pay a ransom for it. That could be, in this case obviously with Netflix it was unwatched or unreleased episodes of a show. For another company, it might be financial information or just something that could be either damaging, like if you're a services company releasing information about one of your customers again, which could be terribly embarrassing for you. I don't believe Netflix paid, and the stuff was released, but I guess they just got on with it. The last one I mentioned is the Kansas Heart Hospital, which is probably not a major organization that people know this side of the Atlantic anyways. They're a large hospital. I think they're in Wichita. But it's well published in the literature. Basically, they kind of learned the hard way. They were hit by it. I believe they went to the FBI, and FBI says, well, there's not much we can do about it. It would appear that their backup strategy wasn't up and their DR strategy wasn't as good as it should have been. It's never fully come out, but it is reputed that they paid a ransom. We don't know how much. It's reputed to have been a six-figure sum. Again, we don't really know. But what we do know is they didn't get their data back, or they certainly didn't get all of their data back. So it was a very expensive lesson for them, a hard-earned lesson. So I guess the thing is, the ransomware stuff is real. I guess we all know that. I mean, there was a time when we were hearing, directly of one attack per month. That thankfully has tailed off quite a bit in recent months, and certainly in the last year it's tailed off a bit. But it's certainly out there and it's certainly real. So what does a ransomware attack, or again, I keep saying ransomware, it's not all ransomware, but what do the attacks look like? They can come in many guises, come from many sources. By far the most common is email. You've probably often seen these types of emails. I have a couple of examples here. I have to admit they're not terribly sophisticated ones. They are ones that I've gotten myself in recent days, probably a week or two ago now. This one purporting to be from Microsoft, a sharing link from OneDrive. It's not terribly well formatted. You can see straight away there, even the return to email address is all wrong. I mean, they're obviously trying to get you to click on the link and download what would almost certainly be a malicious piece of code, or it may simply be a beaconing or something like that, just trying to see if you're alive. Quite clearly, I didn't click on it. Now, what's important to note is this came into my Office 365, and again, Office 365 would have very, very sophisticated, possibly best in the world, anti-spam email content solution, and still it got through that. And this is not me slagging off Office 365, because this stuff will get through Gmail, it'll get through any solution you want. Not all of them, but the odd one will get through. It is impossible to stop all of it. And this is why it's important. You, the end user, is the final line of defense in this stuff. It's up to you as it were, to not click on these links, not open these attachments. The next one is similar. Again, not a terribly sophisticated one, purporting to be from PayPal. I mean, dear PayPal customer. I mean, PayPal know who I am. They know me name. They're going to say, dear Mr. Skelton or dear Mark or dear whatever. So you can see straight away, even the from address is all wrong. And obviously they're trying to get me to click on a download there, probably malicious code attached in that. And I says, now these two examples I've shown you, probably not terribly good ones because they are blatantly obvious, at least to me anyways, and probably to you guys as well. But I would caution, this is not always the case. Sometimes these are incredibly well crafted. I've seen one recently, which unfortunately I deleted. I should have kept it for this slide, for this show presentation. It was so well done. It purported to be from iTunes. After 10 minutes looking at the thing, I still wasn't 100% sure. I think it was fake, but I just deleted it. I mean, it wasn't anything of consequence. And very often these emails are no longer just, these type of, obviously, where they're just blasting them out to thousands or millions of people and hoping people will click on them. Increasingly, these are becoming far more targeted, down to individual organizations and down to individual people. And they will often be in context. You hear, say, the common one is people who deal with, say, the financial transactions, maybe something like property sales. Could be a solicitor's office. You hear if they get an email saying, we're ready to close on the property, 23 Acacia Avenue. Please can you transfer 150,000 euro into the following account? And obviously, it's not the right. It's a fake email, but they've managed to inject themselves into the conversation at exactly the right time. Now, in cases like this, they've almost certainly compromised the email of the person. They've been waiting for this to happen, and they pounced at exactly the right time. So this stuff can be incredibly sophisticated. It's not just this kind of pretty obvious type of phishing emails that I'm showing you there. Okay. How do you protect yourself? Well, earlier it almost sounded like I was rubbishing the technology, saying it's no good anymore. Well, that's certainly not the case. You absolutely should try to use the best of breed technology to try and protect yourself. So that will start with having a good patching Windows update policy. Did say, for instance, the WannaCry recently, that exploited a weakness which had been fixed by Microsoft several months earlier. So people who had kept their Windows machines up to date were not affected by that. I'm happy to say none of our customers were affected by it. And that's mainly, in part at least, due to the patch policy. Make sure you've got a good antivirus product and that it's up to date. There also consider some of the newer sort of best of breed, sort of what they call next generation antivirus products. Not all antiviruses are created equal, but there are newer products out there which are possibly better at tackling this stuff. But it's important to have a good one, a well branded one, and that it's up to date. Talking about antivirus, obviously not just talking about your corporate, work machines. Think about your home machines. Think about even your phone. Think about your iPad. Think about other devices you may have home. Particularly if you use it for work. If you've got a home PC that you occasionally log on to, maybe do your webmail. If that's been compromised, that they could easily get your username and password and use that to launch an attack. And the same goes for Windows updates. Password policy, again, if you've got a corporate environment, hopefully there's a proper policy there to make sure you've got good solid passwords. But also, what about your personal stuff? What about your webmail? What about your social media, Facebook, Twitter, etc.? It's becoming increasingly common for people to launch attacks using different vectors, not just email, and social media is part of that. So, for instance, people will often use social media to try garner or find out about you, to launch the attack. And we increasingly hear of social media, the likes of Facebook Messenger, being used whereby somebody compromises somebody's Facebook, sends a message to somebody, which then appears to be legitimate. And I heard of one case where somebody messaged somebody to undertake a financial transaction. I think they were an insurance firm in the UK. But basically, it was because the person who was attacked had a very weak password on their Facebook that was easily guessed, which allowed them to launch that attack. Consider the use of multi-factor authentication. This is where you have not just passwords, but you maybe get a text to your mobile phone or some other, sometimes it's an app on your mobile phone. Both for corporate use, but also for your personal stuff. Nearly all of the big cloud vendors, the Apples, the Googles, anybody you care to think of like that, Facebook, etc. They all offer for free multi-factor authentication, and I would certainly say, well, turn it on. It's not going to cost you anything, and also consider about using it for your corporate stuff, Office 365, if you got VPN solutions. Protecting at the network level is still important. Obviously, having a good firewall, having good web filtering. A lot of the terminology of next generation firewalls, which basically combine all of this into one. This really seems to be the way to go now. It'll have antivirus, etc. The final one is backups. So backups, and more backups. Backups are your one and only kind of real defense, true defense against ransomware. There's no technology that can completely prevent or guarantee you'll never get ransomware. But if you've got good backups of your data, at least you've got a way out other than paying these people. And it's important that these are what are called air-gapped, so don't just have a backup. I'm thinking particularly for home machines. If you stick a USB drive and then copy the data over, once in a while, and leave the USB drive there, well, the virus is just going to get on and encrypt that as well. So you do need to kind of keep it separate from your live system. Now, I'm happy to say that obviously if you're an IT Force customer, really all of the above would be part of the service, in terms of backups, patching, antivirus, etc., password policies. Obviously, for your home stuff, though, I would recommend that you need to apply all of these protections as well, as I say, to your social media, webmail, etc. I suppose this slide then really encapsulates what I'm trying to get across with the whole. I'd love to just throw up a 5 do's and don'ts and everything, and you'll be fine. But the trouble with that idea of being prescriptive is that every day, certainly every week, there's a new scam, there's a new trick, there's a new variant. So it's very difficult to be completely prescriptive. The Americans have this slightly irritating kind of catchphrase of stop, think, connect, and have a little jingle that goes with it. But it does maybe just get across the message. And as I say, the strapline across the top, when you cross the street, you look both ways to make sure it's safe. You can say, well, what's that got to do with cybersecurity? Well, it's the same sort of idea. So when you're about to do something on the web, just stop for a second. It can be hard. Just, hover your finger above the keyboard or the mouse just for that couple of seconds to think. In the same way, when you're about to cross the street, you don't just start walking across and hope there isn't a car coming. Well, I hope you do. You stop, you look, you make sure. Okay, I realize you're busy, realize you've got lots of emails to get through, and it can be hard, but just take those couple of seconds, stop and think, is this a valid email? I mean, it may even be coming from somebody or appear to be coming from someone that you know. It may even be in context. You're expecting an email about, say, a financial transaction, and here she comes, but you stop. Obviously, the risk, you have to think about what the risk is associated with that. If this is just a routine email, you might not think too much of it and say, okay, that's fine. If it's an email asking you to transfer an 8-figure sum into a bank account somewhere, you really probably should stop there now and think about that for a little minute. If in doubt, ask, ring the person. If somebody in the sales office down in Cork sends you an email or so you think looking for something, ring them and say, listen, I just got your email. Thanks a million. Just wanted to ask one question. In most cases, what they're after here is trying to get you to click on a link or open an attachment. That's not always the case, but those are usually the key points. At this stage, only proceed if you have made reasonable attempts to make sure that it's safe. And if in doubt, just don't do it. Again, if possible, pick up the phone, or quite simply don't do it. You don't have to click on every link. Often you hear of, it's a picture, something comes in which purports to be a picture of, kittens or something like that. Just don't click on it. Well, the world won't stop turning if you don't look at every attachment if you're not sure. At this stage, I'm going to break into a few stories and anecdotes. I think most of which are true. Some of them are anyways. Just to give you an idea, it's very difficult to be prescriptive. One that I often talk about is one of the universities, I think it might have been Trinity, I'm not certain, had a study where they sprinkled a load of USB keys around Dublin, and on them they had a little kind of a benign virus. It was simply a dial home program to see how many people would pick them up and plug them into their machines. And you've guessed it, I think something like 60% of them came back and dialed home. Now, obviously it was completely benign, but that could have been anything. It could have been a virus that could have compromised. And a lot of those would appear to have been from company machines telling by there were static IPs, etc. So people out maybe for the lunch picks the thing up off the ground and plugs it in. Now that for me is the stop moment and the think moment. Is that a great idea? Well, obviously now you think about it, probably not. I heard of another one. One of my colleagues recently talked about. He'd heard of somebody buying a Chris Kindle present for somebody, a little coffee cup warmer. You've probably seen them, like a little hot plate. Plug it into a USB drive. It gets vaguely warm and keeps your coffee warm, supposedly. Got it on eBay for a $5 or something like that. Gives it to somebody. The guy plugs it in. There's a virus on it now. Thankfully, I believe it was picked up by his antivirus. But it just, where did that virus come from? You buy something on eBay, for a $5, you have no idea where it's come from. Don't plug it into your corporate machine. In fact, probably don't plug it into any machine. And again, it's just trying to get you to think about that. The other thing I'd say is don't go looking for trouble. Trouble will find you handy enough on the internet. But if you really go looking for it, we find that in most cases where we've been coming in to do, say, particularly ransomware attacks, that we find that the vector or the means of infection has been a corporate laptop. So somebody's brought their work laptop home. They've engaged in what I would call inappropriate activity. Now, I'm not really talking about anything bad or nasty here. Typically things like watching movies online and stuff like that, maybe getting illegal software. Nothing bad or nasty here. But of course, the end result is they get the virus, they bring the machine back into the company, the virus then starts to go and encrypt their data. And to me, there's almost an element of just criminal stupidity here. You should not do activity and stuff like that on a company device. Probably shouldn't be doing it on any device, but or certainly any device where you, again, as I said earlier, you might be using to active. It could be a home machine, but if you ever use it to, say, access webmail or something like that, it can be compromised and it can be used against you. And it says, I have lots of other examples like that. I know we're probably getting on a little bit for time, so I could start telling anecdotes till the cows come home, but I'd probably best stop at this minute. I'm just looking over to Kieran. Will we take some questions then? Questions and answers. Right, there's one question about ransomware. Is ransomware infection, or is it only on Windows PCs? Is my smartphone safe? That's a good question. The short answer is no. I mean, ransomware and other viruses are far more common in Windows land, and that's mainly because it's such a large target, and most corporate machines are running Windows. But it's certainly, there have been instances of ransomware on other platforms, notably Android. Certainly, I think they believe the first ever ransomware was targeted at Apple back in the 90s, as far as I know. So it's certainly not the case that it's only for PCs. It will be more common in PCs, but it's definitely affects other platforms. I'll look at some other question. Yeah, an interesting one. Should I pay if I'm affected? Oh, yeah. I don't quite know how to answer that one. I suppose the short answer is you shouldn't have to pay. You should have backups. You should have backed your data up. I'm happy to say none of our customers, even though we've had infections, nobody's ever paid up. They've never had to pay, simply because we've been able to restore their data for them, and that's been the way. Now, if it were the case that you didn't have backups, or maybe those backups had been compromised, or you didn't notice it in time, then that's a more difficult question. Should you pay? All I can say is if you do pay, there's absolutely no guarantee that you'll get your data back. And a common enough technique as well is that they might ask for, you get the little ransom message which says, 1 Bitcoin, maybe $200, $300, something like that. And you think, that's not too bad, I'll pay that. So you start going through the mechanics of setting up your Bitcoin account. You pay them the $300. You then get a key which lets you decrypt just a few files. So now, just to show you that they're there, that they're real, that they can do it, and then they hit you with the mother load. They come looking for $5,000, $10,000, $20,000, or if you're a large business, $1 million. It's so. I don't know is the short answer, but what I will say is, if there is no other way to get your data back other than backups. If you don't have a backup, the encryption typically that's used is military grade, maybe AES 256 or higher, something like that. It's not the case that you can go to your IT provider or some security specialist and say, please help me decrypt my data. It's gone, it's encrypted. So if you've no backups, I guess, and you really need it, then yes, maybe it's your only way to get it back, but then absolutely no guarantees. Listen, I realize we're running a little bit over time, and I apologize, we were a tiny bit slow starting. And I don't want to keep you any longer. I want to thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it. I hope that you found it in some way useful, as this wasn't a terribly technical presentation. It was really just to get across the message that, the end, you're the last line of defense. It's up to all of us, to just stop and think, not to click on stuff. We'll be following up with an email and a little short survey. I hope if you found this useful, we'd be grateful if you take just maybe 2 or 3 minutes to fill that out. We'll hopefully to be having more of these educational events, and we'd obviously be grateful and welcome you to join us. Trying to think of any other messages. I think that's us done. Again, thank you very much for your time, and hopefully talk to you again. Take care.